Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, March 29th, 2012. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week, Sean Terrill joins us to share the results of his reverse mashing experiment. If you're trying to make a more fermentable wort, is step mashing the best route, or will letting the temperature of the mash fall over time give you similar results? We'll find out what Sean has found out. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And our 2012 Brewer's Logbooks are in stock and ready to go. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm Basic Brewing, all one word. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. We have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing video page on Facebook as well, facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us and click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you the show, and we greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone and Android podcast apps on their respective stores. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, and we're on the Stitcher app as well. It's good to be back after a week off for spring break. We had buckets and buckets of rain for spring break, so we had to do more indoor kinds of things, but it was nice to have a break from the routine a bit and spend some more time with the kids and the wife. And I hope you had a safe and fun time with your family as well. We have good news on two fronts in the fight for a better beer legislation. First, from Wisconsin, Bob Stemsky tells us that the bill allowing homebrewers in that state to take their beer from their homes and share it with others has passed the legislature and now awaits the governor's signature. Bob says Governor Walker's been busy with other things, apparently, though, and so there it sits on his desk waiting for the signature. So congratulations to everybody who has worked so hard to get the legislation this far up in Wisconsin. Down in Mississippi, Gary Haygood from Raise Your Pints says Senate Bill 2878, that's 2878, to increase the amount of alcohol in commercial beer from 5% by weight to 8% by weight has passed the House is on the way to the governor's desk. That's great news, again. And once again, congratulations to everybody in Mississippi for all the hard work paying off. Keep up the good work. On that positive note, let's jump into the mailbag and read some letters. Darcy up in Alberta, Canada, is a new brewer and says this. Darcy says, I just listened to the episode with Pete from Gatineau, Quebec, and I got to say that we are not all like him. We don't all embrace the cold, nor do we brew in our backyards. Just don't want to give our American brethren the wrong idea about us Canadians. I belong to a brewing club in Red Deer, Alberta, and we brew at one of our members' houses. Darcy says the rest of us are married and the wives don't want it at their place. We ferment in the basement, boil and bottle in the kitchen. With central heating, we can maintain the perfect temperature all through the winter. This is from Beth up in New York City. Beth says, I saw the episode in which you did a partial mash with the Mr. Beer kit. I have a Mr. Beer kit myself, fits really well in a small New York City apartment, and decided to give your partial mash a try. It was only my fourth batch of beer ever, but it was great. Thanks so much for doing that video. I would never have known that I could do a partial mash with equipment on hand. Well, excellent. That's the reason it's the reason we did that video, was to help Mr. Beer folks kind of stretch their wings a little bit and try some new, more advanced brewing techniques. So you'll be happy to know, Beth, that I'm working on a sequel to that episode where we do an experiment around Mr. Beer. And not only do we do partial mashing, but we add lagering in there, too. So look for a new Basic Brewing video episode before the end of this week. Noam in Israel writes, after hearing Chris Colby and I talk about tips to shorten an all-grain brew day, Noam says, as you and Chris mentioned, there is a fixed set of actions that you need to go through during your brew. And like you said, some things can be done ahead of time to save time on brew day, such as milling grain. However, there are a few steps that can be done after the brew day. I always no-chill my wort. That means that after the boil is over, I let the wort stand for 10 to 15 minutes and settle. I then run the hot wort into a sanitized plastic jerry can, seal it, and let it cool naturally. That way I save the chilling time and also don't have to pitch the yeast or sanitize a fermenter until I'm ready for that. Noam says that could be days after the brew day and only takes a few minutes to do, so I don't have to free up a big chunk of time again. He says, I've never done it, but I've heard of brewers that keep unfermented wort in their no-chill containers for months before pitching yeast. That way you could brew a double batch and make one beer for now and keep another for later. Thanks, Noam. Noam says he's going to be up in Seattle at the National Homebrewers Conference, so I'm looking forward to meeting him in person. Which reminds me, if you're working on an experiment to share with us up there in Seattle, please let us know that we can meet up. And it's closer than you think. June's coming up. And speaking of experiments, I'm planning to brew my contribution to the current collaborative experiment on secondary fermentation that Chris Colby and I talked about last time. And I hope to get that into the primary fermenters early next week. And like I say, the deadline is near the end of May, so it's coming up pretty quick. Dan down in Austin sent me an Excel spreadsheet that he uses to streamline his brew day. It's cool to see how organized some brewers can be, and it inspires me to be a little bit more organized. I think, taking a cue from Dan, I think next brew session I'm going to take more detailed notes on what exactly I'm spending my time on during the brew day. But Owen, who says he's a Kiwi living in Sydney, Australia, has another perspective on what he calls not-so-fast brewing. Owen says, rushing my brew day has only led to mistakes, stress, and I didn't enjoy the experience, which is not what home brewing is supposed to be about. Instead, I plan my day according to the activities and align the main tasks of mashing and boiling with those activities. I normally mash for 90 minutes minimum. I get my mash on and take care of activities away from home, such as grocery shopping or kiddie sports, etc. If I get delayed, it's not a real major issue. In fact, I was delayed once, which meant I had actually mashed for 3.5 hours. That beer actually turned out to be one of the best I've ever made. I also use an iPhone app called Brew Timer for managing the boil additions to keep track of time. I'm never too far from the boil. I find the 20 or sometimes 40 minutes in between hop additions is a great opportunity to take care of general housework like vacuuming, mopping, dishes. You get the idea, which means my wife is happy for me to brew because she knows I'll be at home and helping around the house. Owen says, as a wise man once said, happy wife, happy life. There you go. So in summary, Owen says, by not attempting to brew in the shortest time possible, I've been far more relaxed in my brewing, and I've been making better beer than I ever have. But most importantly, I'm enjoying the experience of brewing with balance. There you go. That's why I love home brewing. Everybody's got a different take on it. So, if you can't enjoy it, as I say, if you enjoy stressing out about the details, then by all means, stress out about the details. But if you have a more relaxed approach and you make good beer, man, it's all up to you. So, you want to make a wort that is more fermentable than you'd get out of a single temperature infusion mash. Let's say you're making a lighter lager, or you're making a big old barley wine that you don't want to be too syrupy after it's finished fermenting. Well, most may think that starting at a low mash rest temperature and ramping it up would be the solution. But Sean Terrill took a look at what you would end up with if you took the opposite approach. Well, Sean Terrill, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thank you for having me again.
Now, last time we talked, you were at a little brewery, and you were no longer at that little brewery, so we won't plug them anymore. And you are sort of between opportunities and working on something new. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll just I'll plug myself briefly. Right now I'm at a much smaller brewery, much smaller in the sense that it exists primarily in my head. But yeah, I'm in the beginning stages of opening up my own brew pub.
That's awesome. Where can people find out more about that, or are you at that point where you want to talk about it?
Yeah, we can. We're starting to get the word out. Beginning negotiations with realtors looking for investors. Some of the early stages of everything. But if people want more information or just want to stay informed, it's 2 Mile Brewing Company, 2milebrewing.com. It's on Facebook. It's on Twitter. So lots of ways people can get in touch with me.
And the tagline is?
It's America's highest brewery, 10,200 feet.
I see T-shirts aplenty with that slogan.
Oh, and don't even talk about the wordplay, my goodness.
I don't know what you mean.
Well, it's Colorado. We have different laws on that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, my goodness. So you've got a couple of things going on your website that are interesting. First of all, you've got to kind of put some closure on the refractometer correction issue that we've been talking about. You've got a calculator on your site now.
Yeah, that's something really simple and kind of embarrassing that it took me, I don't even remember how many months to put it up. But previously, people had to download a spreadsheet, and while that's nice, it lets you keep track of multiple batches over time. I just put up a simple calculator on the website where people can just go and plug in the numbers and get an answer immediately if they just want to get one data point.
And an iPhone app is to follow.
Oh, it's PHP, so it'll work on your iPhone.
Oh,
so,
okay. Well,
no Flash.
But you want to charge a couple of bucks at some point, just because that's the way the world works.
I can't, encourage anyone to click on the ads on the site, but no.
So that's at SeanTerrill.com.
Yes, as is everything else we'll be talking about.
Now, let's talk. You've done an experiment in reverse mashing, and I guess we need to cover some basics before we get started into talking about the specifics of your experiment. So do you want, for the newbies out there, do you want to sort of lay some groundwork and a foundation on which we could build?
Yeah, we can do the 60-second mashing lecture. And people who have already heard it or people who aren't interested in the theory can go get a beer. Essentially, when we talk about mashing, what we're doing as brewers is controlling the enzymes that are already present in the grain. And we have 2 primary enzymes of concern in a beer mash, beta amylase and alpha amylase. Beta amylase cleaves starch molecules into maltose, which is a sugar, a disaccharide. It's 2 sugars bonded. And then we have alpha amylase, which cuts dextrins, which are sugars, but sugars that are too big to be fermentable on their own. And it makes more maltose, and it also makes glucose. So essentially, we have 2 enzymes, beta amylase and alpha amylase, that are reducing things that are too big to be fermented by yeast into smaller sugars that can be fermented. And where this comes into the idea of reverse mashing is when you have a step mash, because beta amylase and alpha amylase have different temperature optima. Beta amylase likes to be around 145 to 149 degrees Fahrenheit, about 63 to 65 Celsius. And alpha amylase likes to be a little bit warmer than that, somewhere like 65 to 70 Celsius, which is 149 to 158 Fahrenheit.
So for the newbies that their eyes are now glassing over, why should we care about this as brewers?
Well, essentially, unless you want to brew a highly fermentable wort, you don't need to worry about the 2 enzymes so much. You can just pick a temperature that's sort of somewhere in the middle where they have some slight overlap, somewhere around 65 to 68 Celsius, 150 to 155 Fahrenheit. I probably screwed that one up. Low, mid 150s Fahrenheit. And you're going to produce a wort of average fermentability. If you're brewing something like, say, a light lager or a very high gravity beer where you want greater attenuation, you want it to finish at a lower final gravity, you need to, or at least you might want to consider doing a step mash, which is where you have one temperature rest in the low range for the beta amylase, and then a second temperature rest in the high range for alpha amylase, and you would somehow raise the temperature in between.
So you're basically getting a thinner beer if you do that. You're breaking up the sugars into more fermentable sugars that the yeast can eat, and that way you have sort of a lesser mouthfeel and a more fermentable, slightly higher alcohol beer in the end. And that's basically if you haven't done all grain brewing, or if you're new to all grain brewing, I know that at least when I was first getting into it, I was so caught up on all this, chemical, and biological jargon and technique and all this, that I worried so much about hitting a certain temperature that it wasn't fun.
Yeah, you can certainly blow yourself out on it, at least off the bat. When really the takeaway is, for most beers, mashing is not all that complicated. The enzymes are doing the hard work. Get it to a reasonable temperature, get it to a reasonable pH, hold it there for a little while, and you're going to make a wort.
And don't freak out if your temperature drops somewhat over your, say, hour-long mash, because
right.
It's still going to work. So don't freak out about it. But if you are if you are sort of a more advanced all grain brewer, or if you are someone who likes to tweak temperatures and try to achieve very specific attenuation levels or fermentability levels, this bit of research that you've done would especially be interesting to them.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you do? Are we ready? You think we've laid enough groundwork?
Yeah, we've bored the audience to death. Let's jump into the practical aspect.
So reverse mashing. What is reverse mashing?
Well, essentially what I wanted to look at was the idea that if you want to make a highly fermentable wort, like we said, doing a step mash might be a good idea for you. And since most home brewers and a lot of professional brewers don't have the ability to easily raise the temperature just because of equipment limitations, what if you instead go the other way around? If you start at the higher temperature rest and then drop to the lower temperature.
And my mash tun is not the best at holding temperature, so it's gonna drop over the hour-long mash period. So am I essentially doing a sort of reverse mash accidentally over time?
Well, it would depend on how much it drops. We're talking about a pretty significant temperature drop. The rest temperatures I used for the experiment were 63 and 70 Celsius, which are 145 and 158 Fahrenheit. So that's a 13-degree Fahrenheit temperature drop is pretty substantial. And if regardless of scale or what kind of equipment you have, if you're seeing that kind of drop over an hour-long mash, it's probably something you want to address in one way or another. Mm-hmm. Just from a repeatability standpoint, if you aren't getting reasonable temperature control, and I'm not talking about holding things within 1 or 2 degrees, but holding things within, say, 5 degrees over the course of your hour and a half mash is a good idea, just to have consistency in the future.
Now, we've been told, and we've read that you do a step mash. If you're going to employ different temperature rests, you do it from the bottom up, because at the higher temperatures, the enzymes that work at the lower temperatures are going to be denatured. Does that come into play here?
It should, and I'm sure it will. That's something that I don't have the capability to measure directly. I guess we need to define denaturing. That's just when a protein, like an enzyme, has its shape changed by something like temperature or pH or an acid or whatever the effect is, and because of that, it's no longer useful.
Mm-hmm.
So The theory is that if you do a reverse mash, at some point, because of the higher temperature, you might have to worry about the beta amylase being denatured, so that when you drop it to the lower temperature, it wouldn't be effective anyway.
Mm-hmm.
In these trials, and I did two, one was a 35-minute mash and the other was a 100-minute mash, I didn't really see so much of an effect from that. And in fact, for the reverse mashes, regardless of length, and the control mashes, the conventional step mashes, regardless of length, the attenuations were almost identical.
Of course, you're skipping to the end. Spoiler alert.
Well, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, to answer the question directly, it doesn't seem that within the normal mash parameters, you have to worry about denaturing the beta amylase.
So if you were gonna now you didn't do anything with the protein rest, which would be around 50 degrees Celsius or 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's something that would be certainly traditional. If we're going back to the German brewing tradition in particular. With most modern malts, it's just not going to be necessary. If you have a very high protein grain bill, if you're using a whole lot of wheat, a whole lot of oats, rye, something like that, it might be a good idea. But in general, that's just not something that is typically needed for most beers. So talk about the structure of the experiment.
Okay, so essentially what I did was two sets of trials, like I mentioned before, a short mash and a longer mash. And what I did was used a metal pot, like especially I know a lot of your listeners are brew in a bag folks, and so that'll be familiar with them, using a grain bag in a metal pot to mash. And so just sort of naturally that'll lose a lot of temperature over the course of the mash, especially if you're doing it in an unheated kitchen in Colorado in the winter. So the first trial was a 35-minute mash length. And all I did was I mashed in at the higher temperature, timed how long it took the mash to drop to the lower temperature, and then repeated that with a step mash where I raised it in the middle to do the same length. And then I repeated it again once it got warmer in my kitchen, and that came up with the longer mash. So again, the lengths ended up being 35 and 100 minutes.
How did you raise the temperature for the step mash?
I just put it on the burner on the stove and stirred while checking the temperature.
Mm-hmm. Which, if you're using a cooler mash tun, you can't heat that. So
right, which gets back into the whole concept here, which is that because of equipment limitations, a lot of brewers simply can't do that.
Mm-hmm. Or they may add boiling water to raise the temperature for a step mash.
Or you could pull a decoction, which I'm not even touching that debate.
So what did you find?
Basically, the most significant difference between the two sets of trials was efficiency. I know you did that experiment not too long ago about short mashes and how long it takes to get conversion. Mm-hmm. In this case, with the 35-minute mash, efficiencies averaged about 72%, and in the 100-minute mash, they averaged about 86%. So there was actually a significant increase there, and, if you care about efficiency, which as a home brewer, I would suggest not caring about it, that might be an issue. Efficiency in the control mashes, the traditional step mashes, was higher in both cases than for the reverse mashes. So again, maybe not a technique you want to consider if efficiency is important to you. Attenuation-wise, as I sort of gave a sneak preview of a minute ago, there actually was not a significant difference in the length of the mash. 35-minute control, 69% attenuation. 100-minute control, 71%. And I should mention this is actual attenuation, not apparent. So multiplied by 1.22. So these are very high attenuations. I should have done the math on this ahead of time, but let me.
And while you're doing that, we should say that efficiency is basically the amount of sugars that you can pull out of the mash tun. If you are looking to make the most out of your grain and get the most out of your the sugar the starch and sugar that's locked up in there, if you're more efficient, you'll get a higher gravity, original gravity of wort out before fermentation. If you have a higher efficiency or a more efficient mash,
right?
And that's
we could write a book on efficiency, and several people have.
It sold several copies. Now, and a lot of people get hung up on that. But at the homebrew level, at the commercial level, if you have a few percentage points of efficiency, that's money. But
right, if Anheuser-Busch lost 1% efficiency, that's their profit margin. As a home brewer and even as a small craft brewer, a few percent one way or the other is not going to kill you. Especially on a 5-gallon batch scale, we're talking about the difference between spending $12 on grain and $15.
Right.
At a certain point, you just have to stop worrying about it for the sake of your own sanity.
I'd like to know what Anheuser-Busch's profit margin is, but that's.
I'm pretty sure you need quantum mechanics to work it out.
The gross domestic product of small countries, but
and I did do the math. These attenuations, the apparent attenuations, are averaging about 80% for these beers.
Wow!
So high, but in line with what you'd need for something like a light lager or even just a high gravity barley wine.
So talk about numbers. I mean, compare the actual numbers between the two experiments.
Okay. So in the short mashes, the 35-minute mashes, attenuation in the reverse mash was 66.1%, and in the control, 69.2%. So the conventional step mash did have higher attenuation. In the longer mashes, the 100-minute mashes, 66.0% for the reverse and 70.6% for the control. So in both cases, we had higher attenuation from the conventional step mash. But the really interesting thing here is that even tripling the length of the mash didn't have a significant effect on attenuation.
But it did have an effect on the efficiency, as you said before.
Yes, about a 20% efficiency gain, actually. So pretty significant as far as that goes.
So a longer mash does help your efficiency, but does not necessarily impact your make a difference in the attenuation numbers.
Right, at least in these trials. And I should have mentioned up front that this was just a base malt with a very high diastatic potential, a lot of enzyme content. So that does sort of follow with what you would expect. Most of the enzymes work is going to be done after a few minutes.
Mm-hmm. So what do we take from this? What does this mean?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is probably that if you are not trying to brew a very attenuative wort, you should probably try to maintain your mash temperature. Try to keep losing too much over the course of the mash. So, either insulating your cooler a little better. People wrap them in towels or sleeping bags. I have an oven with a warm setting at 170 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're mashing on the stovetop, that could be really helpful in maintaining temperature over the course of the mash. And then beyond that, if you are trying to make a highly fermentable wort, maybe go the other direction. And instead of having to bother with a step mash, do the reverse step mash.
So in effect, you're saying that the step mash doesn't buy you that much as far
Yeah,
as
it's
results?
we're seeing a small gain in attenuation. It was about 3 or 4%. You could probably compensate for that, just by adjusting what the initial and final temperatures were. And all of this is going to be highly dependent on your system, on the grain bill, because you're going to change the enzyme content, all of those factors. So this is something you're going to have to dial in no matter what. But relative to possibly, outlaying some substantial money to upgrade your equipment to allow for a step mash, or doing something like a decoction, which is frankly kind of complicated and hard to get right, this might be the less intensive technique for a home brewer.
So just to let nature kind of take its course over the...
maybe leave the lid off of your cooler, or stir occasionally, actually promote temperature drop over the course of the mash, and see what happens.
It'd be interesting to see if you tried to maintain an exact level temperature over the length of the mash, where that would fit into this. As a
do a single infusion mash, a more traditional small brewer's mash,
right? And trying to maintain the temperature as level as possible over that course of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's certainly a valid technique, and I think that's probably what most home brewers do if they're trying to make a highly fermentable wort, is just mash in at a very low temperature and maintain that temperature, possibly also extend the mash length. So, instead of doing maybe 154 Fahrenheit for something like a pale ale, do 147.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna have to look at how my temperature falls over time. I tend to do mashes, start them in the 153 to 154 range. And most of what I've been making lately has been hoppy pale ales and Belgians. So, the sugar in the Belgians is going to make that a thinner beer anyway. And I like a bit of...
Yeah, and we should have mentioned that. That's also a totally valid technique, is just do a more conventional mash and then add simple sugar directly to sort of increase fermentability and approximate the effect that you would get from something like a step mash.
I know that a very popular double IPA recipe calls for adding sugar into the boil pot to sort of thin out the body, so that this extremely high gravity beer isn't too thick on the tongue.
Mm-hmm. Right. Can't imagine what recipe that would be. Can we plug breweries that aren't even on the show?
Well, it's a Pliny clone, is what I was. We've talked about Russian River enough, and we've had Vinny on the show a couple of times and such. But yeah,
in case there are home brewers who aren't aware of Russian River,
they will be aware soon if they aren't already.
Yeah. And Vinny, just email me for my address so you can send that check.
Maybe he can be an investor in the highest brewery in the country.
Ooh, there you go.
Well, what else? I mean, what else can we take? Are there any other? Are you done with this, or are you going to do any more?
I think I'm probably done with this specific, at least from an experimental standpoint. It's a technique that I may actually use doing some high gravity beers in the future. But as far as being able to generalize, everything is so equipment specific and so ingredient specific that I think this has demonstrated the basic concept is valid, and in anyone else's brewery, they would just have to take it from there on their own.
Very nice. And I'll put a link to the experiment in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. Always good to talk to you. And you're going to Seattle in June?
That's the plan, yeah. I have reservations made and a hotel room booked and all that. So that may very well be the coming out party for 2 Mile Brewing. That's the plan.
Cool. Well, we hope to get with you out there and for fun and business reasons as well. So,
all right.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, James.
Well, thanks again to Sean. I wish Sean the best of luck in his new venture. And I'll post a note or a link to Sean's research in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. And if you decide to do some experiments along those lines, I'm sure that Sean would love to hear what you find out. And we would too, obviously. If you have brewing questions... Oh, next week, we are going to do the second half of the Solera tasting with Nathan Zender and Michael Tonsmeyer and the gang from around here. Very, very nice. So you'll want to tune in. In the meantime, if you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site, along with our Brewer's Logbook, which is available to order. We got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time, and you can check out our new Basic Brewing shirts in the store, too. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com, and if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Cohiba AccuCut Heavy Duty Stainless Steel Guillotine Cigar Cutter and Forever Collectibles NFL Indianapolis Colts Team Gnome. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping, and we greatly appreciate your support. Don't forget you can also join the American Homebrewers Association or subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dutson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, beware of April Fools. So long.